welcome to Actual English, everyone. I'm Jennifer Clyde. It's time for lesson 249, and today's topic is food poisoning. Have you ever had food poisoning before? This is what happens. It's an illness. Not exactly a disease, but an illness. And symptoms of food poisoning may be dizziness, nausea. You may have to go to the bathroom, come back, go back again to the restroom. So you may have diarrhea. I think in most cases people do have diarrhea. Now, you can be really, really sick. In some cases, you may have to be rushed to the hospital. So what happens if you have food that has gone bad? For example, especially during the hot summer season, in Korea we see a lot of people having kimbap. Right? If you don't have much time to have, a decent lunch or a meal for lunch, what you can do is grab some kimbap from a convenience store or small snack bars. But if you leave food such as kimbap outside and not in the refrigerator for too long, well, it is going to go bad. And if by any chance you have the kimbap, you will end up with food poisoning. You will get very sick. Okay then, that is our topic for today. Why don't we begin with actual talk?
Kelly, I heard you were quite sick recently. Are you
Yes.
feeling any better?
I am, thank you. Much better.
What was wrong?
Oh, I had terrible food poisoning. One of the worst cases I'd had in adult memory. It was horrible.
Food poisoning is the worst.
Yeah.
You know, it's food coming out of every end, every hole. And
yeah.
Let's not go into too much detail there, but what caused it?
No. You know what? It's always difficult to tell. I think it was my fault. I purchased a sandwich. I didn't eat it right away. Of course, temperatures change. I kept it in a backpack I had.
Yeah.
And I think that it had perishable content.
Yeah.
And I ended up really ill.
So you ate
for
it
about a
many
week.
hours after you purchased it, and it could have gone
I
off.
ate it gradually, but it wasn't the kind of thing that I should have. I should have eaten it right away, or I should have put it into a refrigerator or an airtight container. And I think this one was my fault.
I've heard lots of public health or public service announcements saying that, you've got to be really careful in the summer because things go off much more quickly because of the temperatures.
Yes.
But it always slips my mind. Like I'll have a yogurt drink or something in the house and I'll leave it on the side after I finish half. But I guess you should be really careful, like put it back in the refrigerator or finish it immediately. Otherwise,
Especially with dairy,
Yeah.
and there's already bacteria, so much bacteria. And I have a thing with street food. I think you have to be especially careful with street food in warm weather. Like I personally don't eat it anymore.
if it's been left out on those carts for a long
You never
time,
know.
right?
I mean, you don't know, and it gets so hot these days. It's very humid.
It's
So
better to be on the safe side, I guess. Cook it
you can
freshly
suffer.
and eat it straight away.
that's right. Or else you find yourself suffering for a week like I did.
Okay, I'm gonna try not to take a leaf out of your book and stay away from street foods in the summer. Good tip.
There you go.
Well, you see, you need to be very, very careful in preparing food in the summer season and make sure that everything is cooked when you eat it. And make sure that you leave drinks in the refrigerator or put them back in the refrigerator if you don't finish it. Now, Peter's mentioned something about how he occasionally maybe grabs some milk from the fridge and he forgets to put it back in the fridge. He leaves it on the table. But what happens if you have that milk again 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours later? Well, you could end up being sick. Okay, let's take a look at the actual talk conversation then. Here we go. Now, Peter says, Kelly, I heard you were quite sick recently. Okay, so he's beginning a conversation by saying, I heard about you being sick. Is that right? I heard that you were quite sick recently. And she says, yes. He asks, are you feeling any better? Are you feeling any better? The least better, he asks. She says, I am, thank you, much better. Now, to the point, he asks the question, what was wrong? Now, he is talking about what had happened in the past, right? Now, she was sick recently. That's why he's saying, what was wrong? What was the problem? She says, oh, I had terrible food poisoning. That is today's topic, everyone. Now, You would not say I had a terrible food poisoning. Always remember, I had food poisoning or I had terrible food poisoning. One of the worst cases I've had in adult memory. Basically, she's saying that ever since she became an adult, yes, she's never been sicker than this. So she's saying it was really, really bad. It was horrible. Now, Peter says, oh, food poisoning is the worst. Nothing's worse than food poisoning. It's food coming out of every end, every hole. You know what? I had this sentence and I sat there looking at this and I thought to myself, should I go over this or not? This is tricky to go over because I need to explain to you in detail, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. And I hope you get the idea of what Peter is saying. Now, he's talking about food poisoning. What happens? He says, it's food coming out. Coming out of where? Every end. Every hole. Okay. So imagine our body, okay? Every end, maybe not, but every hole, possibly. Now, our body parts have ends to them. Okay, if we stretch our arms out, then there is an end. Our fingertips would be the end of our arm, right? And our toes would perhaps be the end of our leg or our feet. What he means by every hole is, hole, there are many, many holes in our body, for example. Openings, in other words. We have our nostrils, okay? Holes in our nose. We have our ear holes. Also, our mouth is an opening as well, and many other types of openings in our body. So basically, he's saying food is coming out of every end or every hole. He is referring to our butt part, okay? Hope you get the idea. Anyhow, he's basically saying that if you have food poisoning, you end up having diarrhea. Okay, let's not have too much detail, he says. Okay, let's get to this question. What caused it? Okay, what was the cause? She says, you know what? It's always difficult to tell. Now here, tell is not used in the way to describe to someone, to tell somebody, to explain to somebody. Here she's saying it's really difficult to know exactly why. It's difficult to find out the reason as to why. I really don't know why. It's difficult to tell. And she says, I think it was my fault. I think it was my fault. I purchased a sandwich. So she bought a sandwich. What happened? I didn't eat it right away. She didn't eat it right away. So I guess she waited for some time to have the sandwich. Of course, temperatures change. It can be hot to cold or cold to hot. She says, I kept it in a backpack I had. So she was carrying a bag with her and she put the sandwich that she had bought in the backpack. And I think that it had perishable content and I ended up really ill. We have perishable basically meaning subject to decay, ruin, or destruction. In other words, especially if you're talking about food, we're talking about food or content that's easily spoiled, okay? That easily rots, for example. And she ended up really ill. She ended up being very, very sick. So you ate it many hours after you purchased it, he asks. Many hours after you bought the sandwich? She says, I ate it gradually. What does she mean by this? I ate it gradually. If you do something gradually, you are not doing it all at once. You are doing maybe a little bit of it, one at a time, taking baby steps, for example, continuously, slowly, gradually. So she's saying she had the sandwich, but she ate it gradually. I should have eaten it right away, or I should have put it into a refrigerator. Or an airtight container. Airtight is what? If something is airtight, you're basically saying that it prevents entrance of air or even gas. It also stops gas or air from escaping that container. So she's talking about an airtight container. I'm sure you all have seen an airtight container. There are containers in which we can keep food in. We put food in it and we put the lid on and throw it in the refrigerator. And many of these containers have airtight lids. These containers are airtight, meaning air is not let into or out of the container. Okay? So that's what she's saying. She should have eaten it right away or put it into the refrigerator or put it in an airtight container. She says, I think this one was my fault. So she is blaming herself. Peter says, I've heard lots of public health or public service announcements saying that you've got to be really careful in the summer. Why? Because things go off much more quickly because of the temperatures. So you've got to be really careful in the summer. Why? Because things go off much more quickly. Now, food can spoil. It can go bad. If food goes bad, you're saying that it is spoiled. Okay, it's not good to eat. Also, to go off means that it's been spoiled. If you say, oh, something is off, you're saying that something is strange. Something is weird. Something is not right. So if you say that food goes off, you're saying that food rots or spoils. Okay? All right, it's anyway because of all the temperature changes. But it always slips my mind. That's our pattern for today. Now, he's saying that he hears announcements everywhere about how you should be very careful about how you prepare your food, how you keep it, when you eat it. But he says, it always slips my mind. What does that mean? Here, imagine. You have an idea, okay? But it slips your mind. It's in your mind, but then again, it goes, whoop, slips your mind. It kind of goes away. Now, slip one's mind basically means to forget something, okay? If you want to say, I forgot to do that. It slipped my mind. I forgot, okay? I'll have a yogurt drink or something in the house. He's talking about having a yogurt. And I'll leave it on the side after I've finished half. So what is he saying? Maybe he'll have a yogurt or any other kind of drink in the refrigerator. He pulls out the yogurt, has half of the yogurt, and what? Leaves it on the side. Does not put it back into the refrigerator, but he leaves it on the side, maybe on the table or something. But I guess you should be really careful. Put it back. Put it back in the refrigerator or finish it immediately, right away. Now, Kelly says, especially with dairy, we're talking about dairy products, cream, we're talking about ice cream, butter, things like that, cheese. There's so much bacteria. And I think you have to be especially careful, super careful with street food in warm weather. We talked about street food. What is street food? Street food. We often walk on the streets, especially in those busy areas. Let's say, for example, like Gangnam Station, for example. There are tons of street food vendors on the streets, and they sell food on the street. That's why we call them street food. So there is a lot of street food, but you have to be extra careful, especially careful in warm weather. And she says, I personally don't eat it anymore. Personally means in person or in direct contact, but she's saying as for herself. Okay, she's giving us an example of what she does. So she says, personally, I do not eat it anymore. She's talking about street food. Peter says, if it's been left out on those carts for a long time, right? That's right, because if food is left on those carts in warm temperatures, food could go bad. Now, Kelly says, you never know. You may be right. It could go bad. It may not go bad, but you never know what's going to happen. I mean, you just don't know, and it gets so hot these days. It's very humid. You all know this word, H-U-M-I-D. Humid is what? Yes, it means very wet. moist, muggy, stuffy. These are all synonyms. So it's the opposite of dry, okay? And then Peter says it's better to be on the safe side. Be on the safe side. Basically, this means better to be safe than sorry. You've heard that, right? It's better to be safe than sorry. Or it's better to be on the safe side. It's better to be safe, in other words. And he says, I guess, cook it freshly. When you prepare food, cook it freshly and eat it straight away. Straight away meaning what? Right away. Don't let it sit there. Don't let it wait. Eat it right after you cook it. Eat it straight away. That's right, she says, or else you'll find yourself suffering for a week like I did. Okay, so we know that she has suffered for a week because of food poisoning. Anyhow, we have Peter saying, okay, I'm going to try not to take a leaf out of your book. And stay away from street foods in the summer. Good tip. And of course, Kelly says, there you go. Let's take a look at what Peter's mentioned here. Okay, this is one of our other patterns. Take a leaf out of somebody's book. What does that mean? He's saying, I'm going to try not to take a leaf out of your book. This idiomatic expression means to copy or to imitate someone, or imitate something that somebody does in a particular way. Do as they do. Okay, take their example. So he's saying, I'm going to try not to take a leaf out of your book, meaning I'm going to try not to do what you did. I'm going to try not to do exactly as you did. So he's saying, I will do the opposite. I'll be very safe. And also, stay away, refrain from street foods in the summer. And he says, good tip. And she finishes off by once again saying, there you go. That's the idea. Good for you. That's right. There you go. Okay, let's take a listen to the conversation one more time.
Kelly, I heard you were quite sick recently. Are you
Yes.
feeling any better?
I am, thank you. Much better.
What was wrong?
Oh, I had terrible food poisoning. One of the worst cases I'd had in adult memory. It was horrible.
Food poisoning is the worst.
Yeah.
You know, it's food coming out of every end, every hole. And,
yeah.
let's not go into too much detail there. But what caused it?
No. You know what? It's always difficult to tell. I think it was my fault. I purchased a sandwich. I didn't eat it right away. Of course, temperatures change. I kept it in a backpack I had.
Yeah.
And I think that it had perishable content.
Yeah.
And I ended up really ill.
So you ate
for
it
about a
many
week.
hours after you purchased it, and it could have gone
I
off.
ate it gradually, but it wasn't the kind of thing that I should have. I should have eaten it right away, or I should have put it into a refrigerator or an airtight container. And I think this one was my fault.
I've heard lots of public health or public service announcements saying that, you know, you've got to be really careful in the summer because things go off much more quickly because of the temperatures.
Yes.
But it always slips my mind. Like, I'll have a yogurt drink or something in the house and I'll leave it on the side after I finish half. But I guess you should be really careful. Like, put it back in the refrigerator or finish it immediately. Otherwise,
Especially with dairy,
Yeah.
and there's already bacteria, so much bacteria. And I have a thing with street food. I think you have to be especially careful with street food in warm weather. Like, I personally don't eat it anymore.
if it's been left out on those carts for a long
You never
time,
know. I mean, you don't know, and
Sure.
it gets so hot these days. It's very humid.
It's
So
better to be on the safe side. I guess cook it
you
freshly
suffer.
and eat it straight away.
that's right. Or else you find yourself suffering for a week like I did.
Okay, I'm gonna try not to take a leaf out of your book and stay away from street foods in the summer. Good tip.
There you go.
Welcome back, everyone. It's time for actual expressions. Are you ready? Okay, let's take a look at some vocab words from today's actual talk conversation. We have food poisoning, our topic for today. Let's take a look at the pronunciation. It's simple. Food poisoning. All right? What about perishable? Perishable. Easily spoiled. I did explain to you. If something is easily destroyed, you can also say that it's perishable. Some synonyms are decaying or easily spoiled. Especially when you talk about food, perishable means that it goes bad easily. Airtight. Stress goes right there on air. Airtight means what? Impenetrable, closed, or even shut. Meaning that air is not allowed into or out of something, such as an area or even containers. An airtight container would be a container that prevents air from going in and from going out of the container. Okay, air or gas. Moving on to personally. Personally, directly, individually, or in person. You could talk about your personal thoughts, your personal ideas, or even your personal experience by saying personally, and so on and so forth. Moving on to humid. When you talk about weather, how it's wet and stuffy and muggy and moist, you can say that it is humid. Okay, moving on to today's pattern. Slip one's mind means to be forgotten. Okay, if something slips your mind, you're saying that you remembered it for a while, but it somehow slipped your mind. It was forgotten. Here's a sample sentence. I meant to call you this morning, but it totally slipped my mind. I meant to call you this morning, but it totally slipped my mind. What does it mean? I meant to call you this morning, but I totally forgot. Okay? Moving on to take a leaf out of one's book. This means to what? Imitate or copy somebody's, way of doing things. Okay, to do something exactly as somebody else does it. Imitate or copy somebody. You could say, maybe I should take a leaf out of your book and exercise in the morning. So what are you implying in this sentence? You're saying, you exercise every morning. Maybe I should exercise every morning just like you. So you can say, maybe I should take a leaf out of your book and exercise every morning. Got the idea? Okay, job well done, everyone.